Welcome to the SC Biz News live stream power event on reopening the Lowcountry and the region for business part 2. My name's Andy Owens. I'm the executive editor for SC Biz News. We're the publishers of the Charleston Regional Business Journal, the Columbia Regional Business Report, the GSA Business Report in the Upstate, and SC Biz News, which is a statewide economic development magazine. Very glad to have you joining us today for this luncheon event. We're doing it this way simply because we can't do our live events in person like we used to anymore, given the circumstances. But it's important to note that we still rely on sponsors and partnerships to bring these to you. These are businesses and companies and organizations that understand information, they understand the power of information, and they can help you grow your business. If you have need for a product or service, consider these sponsors that we're going to hear from in a minute. And we will be right back.
You know, until about 3 months ago, for my entire life, I had been under the impression that 2020 meant clarity of vision. In fact, it meant perfect vision every time I went to the eye doctor. But my experience perhaps has been a bit like yours, and 2020 has been anything but clear vision. You know, I read recently that we started the year 2020 like 1974 with an impeachment. We then quickly morphed into what looked like 1918 with a global pandemic. Not long after, we found ourselves in 1929 as the economy began to go south. And then just a few weeks ago, we found ourselves in what certainly seems to be, even today, like 1968, with a country filled with social and civil unrest. I don't know about you, but what the last few months have demonstrated to me is that there's a lot of work to do. A lot of work to do in the country, a lot of work to do in our region. And what I know is that we can't get the work done until we get back to work. And so Charleston Southern University stands with all of you as we think through how we can be one region ready. We're ready, and I know you are too. In our case, it's getting students back on campus so that we can prepare servant leaders to pursue significant lives. Join us at Charleston Southern University as we do exactly that. God bless you.
My name is Anthony Simonetti, and I'm the Senior Manager for the Solutions Architect team that supports your local coastal business team with Verizon. We represent another layer of partnership at your disposal, focused in on solving industry-specific challenges and protecting your bottom line through the introduction of connected devices, software, and IoT solutions. Today, we are partnering with manufacturing and logistical companies on the return-to-work strategy and looking for ways to meet CDC guidelines and maintain safety through a variety of screening solutions. Traditionally, we've always been the partner to look to in this space, helping businesses drive efficiency through environmental and asset monitoring technology ranging from tracking materials, to vehicles, and even personnel. Maximizing our value in these industries has been Verizon's focus for very many years, and we would love to have the opportunity to sit down with you and talk about how we can architect the solution that moves your business forward. So please, take a moment to reach out to your local Verizon Coastal team, and let's begin that conversation today.
All right, we are glad to have you join us today. We're back. What you're about to see is a live stream event. This is not scripted, it's not pre-recorded. We're in a studio in North Charleston talking to Jim Newsome, the CEO, President of the South Carolina Ports Authority. And just like our live events in person, these work best when we have audience participation. There are two ways you can participate in this event if you're watching on YouTube. The first is to put your questions into the chat window with YouTube, and we will get to as many as possible. Our creative director and producer, Ryan Wilcox, is going to be facilitating some of that. The second way is to have a discussion among yourselves. What we've found as we've done more of these is that the audience actually engages in a conversation in the chat window with themselves about the things that we'll be talking about. So feel free to do that. It's an interesting way to go. So we're going to be talking today about a number of things, but you can't talk about South Carolina's economy unless you talk about the Port of Charleston and the South Carolina Ports Authority. There's not an economic development announcement that comes through where a small company or large company of any size doesn't mention the port as part of their decision making and their site selection and coming to South Carolina. So it's really an economic development asset. It's an economic driver, especially when you consider the number of cars that come through. But to get us started, Jim, how has the port navigated the coronavirus pandemic from a health and safety standpoint?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Andy.
Thank you.
We've been very fortunate in the sense that we never shut down, due to the pandemic. And if you think about it, the port is a sort of naturally social distanced environment. Most of our people are in lift machines or in cranes, so they're not really meeting people face to face as part of our operations. Several years ago, we employed technology to handle our gate interactions with truckers, so all of that's done remotely as well. And then we were extremely fortunate to have built an office where we had standing height cubes where people had some privacy, basically. So we really were very fortunate in that sense. And I would say that in general, we just have a great maritime community that's committed to providing service to our clients, that took the right steps to assure safety. We put a pandemic plan in place with the ILA and our other partners, and everyone did their part. So I think it's a great story of commitment and really using common sense and to keep the port operating and fluid.
Very good. So e-commerce was already quite a force. No one probably saw the acceleration of direct-to-consumer like what has happened. I saw some companies have said 74%. Is this a permanent paradigm shift or a temporary inconvenience?
It's a permanent paradigm shift as far as we're concerned. I think you're seeing the retail industry go in a couple of directions. The large omni-channel capable retailers, who we all know who they are,
Right.
are really taking share. You've seen they're adding people because they can deliver in stores and they can deliver through robust e-commerce. We all have higher expectations for e-commerce today. You want stuff in a day, not in a week or 2 weeks.
That's right.
So, and then I think on the other end of the spectrum, the small specialty retailers are really challenged to compete in that environment. So we had foreseen that trend. That's where our focus has been in terms of retail distribution, because most studies show that e-commerce distribution takes a lot more square footage and a lot more capacity because people want faster delivery. So I think we were on top of the trend. But it's permanent as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I just look at myself. I'm not 29, but I certainly don't hardly buy anything anymore without looking online.
Is this the death knell for brick and mortar investment?
Well, I don't say death knell. I mean, that would probably be too dramatic, but certainly there will be challenges in commercial real estate as a result of this.
Definitely.
And I think that the bricks and mortar that it successfully remains will be part of a broader omni-channel strategy where, if you will, the store probably functions as sort of the catalog, if you will, for a broader offering of products. I think it's good for the port, I think, because there's going to be the need for more distribution centers to support good e-commerce and good omni-channel delivery.
Also, if you just heard an airplane cross over, this is a live event, and we are near the airport, so don't let that stop you from watching. And this is a question that I'm not sure what the answer is, because this is kind of happening in real time. But considering the national conversation around reshoring of products and medical supplies and inventory, are we in the middle of a shift right now, or is that just a bit of a political discussion point?
Well, I'm skeptical about it. I mean, I think if you look over 20 years' time, we offshored a lot of manufacturing, mainly to China, and China developed a really robust supply chain, a great port network. I think 8 of the 10 largest ports in the world are in China. Unbelievable capability there. About 60% of the Asia trade is China today. Starting a couple of years ago, there was a move afoot that a lot of manufacturing would go to other countries, such as Vietnam. They called it a +1 strategy. And some of that happened. And then there was also talk about reshoring. But I'm a skeptic about reshoring. I don't believe that at least prior to the pandemic, that we have the workforce to really do that, in a grand scale. I think that there are reasons this manufacturing work is offshore. And I think particularly as the large omni-channel retailers grow their share, a lot of that is in private labeling And really, one of the only places you can do private labeling on significant scale is in China. I mean, if you look at just, we don't import iPhones or iPads, but when the question was put to Tim Cook of Apple several years ago, why don't you reshore? He said, because I can't do the scale that I can do in China. So I think to some extent it's wishful thinking. The idea that we would sort of crawl in a box and not trade anymore sort of refutes 200 years of history, David Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage. I think that's still very much intact.
Gotcha.
So we're bullish about the future. We're also bullish about our region, the Southeast region. We think will outperform the rest of the country because of population growth, shifting population, and because we are really good at manufacturing and distribution here.
Have you seen any changes in the demand for industrial warehouse and distribution space in South Carolina as a result of what's going on right now?
Well, we think that demand is growing, and we were very focused in the last 10 years on advanced manufacturing because the state has been such a juggernaut in advanced manufacturing. If you look at the growth, if you just use BMW as an example, having invested $9 billion in 20 years, and even significant growth in my 10 years in the port. If you look at their container volume, it's rather significant. So we're probably late to the game in getting on the retail trend. We're also a small state historically, but that's changing now. So to be in the retail distribution business, you need land. I mean, a port is dependent on land to do big scale retail distribution. We didn't have a lot of that. So in 2018, we bought 1,000 acres in Ridgeville is sort of our starting point to really develop a retail distribution strategy. And we also marketed our Wando transload facility for that purpose. So we're making good progress, but we think that the future, because of the fact that omnichannel needs more space, because of the fact that there will be continued growth in retail distribution among certain companies, we're bullish about the future.
If there's an uptick in demand, if what you think may happen happens, do we have enough space to satisfy something immediately?
Absolutely. I mean, we've got several spec buildings in town today that are really world-class buildings. And then we have the potential to put large projects out in the Ridgeville area. We're working on some of those projects today. So I think that we can meet the need. And then I think we should also not lose sight of the fact that our inland port network supports that as well.
Exactly.
If you look at an inland port like Greer, which has really set the standard for short-haul rail inland ports, I mean, handling about 150,000 containers a year and being within 500 miles of 100 million consumers, with a lot of onward distribution capability, I think we have a lot in our toolbox.
Right.
To offer companies. What people don't realize, one of the biggest challenges for retail distribution is not getting the containers to an import distribution center. It's actually getting the cargo out of the container and into a domestic 53-foot trailer to where it's finally needed. So that's where Greer really stands out in terms of being between Atlanta and Charlotte on a very busy highway system. So we've got a lot of things to offer, and I think we are very focused on doing that today.
Looking at the supply chain capacity, do we have the capacity if things ramp up?
Absolutely. We have, of the many things that I'm proud of in the port, and specifically the people that work in the port, I think we should never lose sight of the fact that the port's about the people in our industry, that 10,000 or so that do a great job. We're really at the tail end of a 6-year infrastructure investment plan where we have planned well for 20, 30 years of future growth in the port and really addressed every need that we would have in terms of harbor deepening, in terms of improving the capacity of our existing terminal, the Wando terminal, with big cranes to be able to handle multiple big ships, and building the only new terminal in the United States since 2009, the Leatherman terminal, along with our inland port network. So I think we have, in 6 years' time, with a lot of money, $2 billion of investment, we have really met every need, and things are coming in place. In spite of the pandemic, I think that's the thing a lot of people will be interested in knowing. The pandemic for us is a short-term disruption, but our capital planning never got off track. We've got a great board that supports us in that because we built 50-year infrastructure in the port, and we're going to need it.
So give us an update on the dredging project. Where are we? What does it look like? We're still on track, you said, but what is the timeline for?
Well, the timeline is good. I mean, we are in contract 1, 2, and 3 right now, so they're working in the entrance channel in the lower harbor, and they're expanding the Wando turning basin. The expansion of the Wando turning basin to 1,650 feet, which is critical to turn big ships without restriction to the Wando terminal, will be completed in May of 2021. We think the entire project will be completed in May of 2022. It's on time. It's actually ahead of time. And the best news of all is it's fully funded by the federal government. We're past all those hurdles, so we're not worried about any contingent funding depending on what happens with the federal budget going forward due to the pandemic. So we're in really good shape. It's been a world-class project. Our team, our Chief Operating Officer, Barbara Melvin, did a great job managing that project, and it's critical to our future because we're, by this time next year, going to handle 6 ship systems of 13,000 TEUs and above, and we're fully prepared to handle an 18,000 TEU ship. And I believe that ship is coming to the East Coast latest 2022.
So I saw the other day that you guys did handle 3 of the largest ships that you've ever done. So how will the new turning basin and everything allow you to do more than that?
So the name of the game is really to get a ship in and out, from pilot to pilot as fast as possible with what we call maximum berth productivity, which is individual crane productivity by the times the number of cranes that you can deploy on a ship. So the goal of the deepening project, the goal of the turning basin widening, the goal of buying bigger cranes, everything we do is to remove restrictions to timeliness and productivity. So if we can get a ship into the dock without having to wait for another start time, we get it out faster. We free up that berth for the next ship, basically. So our world is really about improving productivity per TEU and really the number of TEU we can handle per acre. So all that we've done, buying 15 big cranes that can work these big ships very timely is all about speed, all about productivity, ultimately all about cost. Shipping lines want to go places where they don't have to wait because they have to make appointments at the Panama Canal and things of that nature. So we are really world-class in that sense.
And if you were a commercial developer or an economic developer, what would you recommend that they invest in right now? What kind of inventory?
Well, I think that there are, what we see, number one, we think port-dependent land is a good investment. We think that anything that can support the growth of the port. I mean, you said it in your opening, the port's a major economic driver. Businesses want to locate near ports. So I think port-dependent land's a good investment. And we sort of see 2 ends of the spectrum. We have a lot of demand for transloading of cargo, which is really very efficient, fast-paced handling of a lot of containers in 150 to 300,000 square foot buildings. And then the other end of the spectrum is really large distribution, because as we said, the big retailers are getting bigger. And they're looking at buildings 1 million feet or bigger, basically. So there's really 2 ends of the spectrum, and we think that that's going to continue to grow.
Do you, so there was a downturn in volume. How much of a downturn did you experience?
So it's interesting. So we have a July through June fiscal year. I always tell people I celebrate Christmas on June 25th. I really don't. And if you look through February of our fiscal year, which was 8 months, and that is roughly, we were 25,000 containers ahead of our plan. We were on record pace.
Yeah, good.
You look at through March, we were at 75 million operating cash flow, so we were easily headed to 100 million operating cash flow. And then China never came back really from Chinese New Year for 6 weeks, and then the Western world shut down due to the pandemic. So basically, we had 61 blank sailings between the end of January and July. It's about 10% of the number of sailings we would expect. So our volume in the last 3 months is down about 15%. And so from being 25,000 containers ahead of plan, we probably will end the fiscal year 50,000 containers behind plan. So that's significant. We see next year as a crawlback. We see it literally every month next year as a slow crawlback, a type of U-shaped recovery. that gets us probably to a number next year that's about 8% lower than this fiscal year. And then I think fiscal 2022 is going to look kind of like fiscal 2020, where we should have been there. And then from there, we've got some projects in place that we think will enable us to grow above the market and recover the ground that we lost. And the big debate we have internally is, when do we get back on plan where we should have been?
Right.
And I think we think that's quicker than what you might think.
Gotcha. Were there any particular categories of imports or exports that stayed level during the last 2 months?
Well, so I mean, there are puts and takes on that. Obviously, the one big impact on us was the automotive industry. We're very dependent on the automotive industry,
definitely.
and so when the automotive industry shut down in the end of March, basically, and then reopened somewhat in May, that really impacted us in April and May, and continues to impact us as well. Additionally, Europe has impacted us. We've always been a disproportionate Europe port, and Europe has impacted us because the economy is really slow there. China's back today. I mean, China's pretty much back at work. We had done some things on retail transloading at the Wando terminal. We're doing e-commerce transloading for a big customer, so that was an upside. And we're also getting into the plastics transloading business now. You see there are 2 major projects that are coming online October 1. We'll have a total of 4 plastics transloaders here, and that should, in a year or 2 period of time, add about 70,000 containers to our volume.
Wow.
So we've got pluses and minuses, but I think what our major goal has been to diversify our cargo base, to grow our cargo base, and I think we've been successful at that. We'll continue to be successful.
All right, very good. We're going to take a short break and hear from a couple of more sponsors, and we will be right back.
Hi, folks. This is Eric Dahl with COMCAST Business here in our Charleston sales office. We're very proud to be a sponsor of the Business Journal event series, and we're very excited to announce this year for the first time the availability of our fiber optic services for business with speeds up to 100 gigabits per second in the entire Charleston metro area. That's right, don't adjust your sound. It's 100 gigabits per second. You heard it right. Fastest in the Charleston area. So as your business prepares to come blazing out of the gates with a return to better than normal, we hope that you'll consider Comcast fiber services for your telecommunications solution. Thank you, and as always, let's be careful out there.
This is business today. Fast, unpredictable, always changing. Shifting trends and technologies are pushing aside old rules. The unexpected is the new normal. At SEGRA, we'll help you navigate a complex future with state-of-the-art voice, internet, and data protection solutions. We know you have dreams, and we see your potential. SEGRA, freedom to grow.
We really are.
All right, welcome back. We are continuing our discussion with Jim Newsome, the CEO and president of the South Carolina Ports Authority. Jim, you mentioned that you've been here 10 years at the helm of the port. What in that 10 years' time, what was your biggest surprise?
I think I knew a lot when I came. I knew that the port had a lot of great things going for it. And it really was no one surprise. I felt like we had a mission to accomplish, which was to get back on a growth track. I mean, there's no way a business succeeds without growing. And we were able to do that. We had a great team. I knew we had a great team. And I think we had to just make sure that we had a consistent message, and we had to make sure that everybody was on the same page and delivering on that message. So I think the results speak for themselves. We doubled our volume in 10 years' time. And I think more importantly, positioned ourselves for a bright future, really got back image-wise on the world stage where we needed to be. So I'm real proud of the team, not just the port team, the maritime industry. We have to always be careful. We don't just talk about people, the 730 people that work for the port. Talk about the ILA, the truckers, the people that come every day, you know, with blood, sweat, and tears to deliver really the best product in the country in the port industry.
So what kind of impact, looking at the larger maritime community, what kind of impact has the pandemic affected them?
You know, work is down proportionately.
Sure.
We are very fortunate in this industry, again, that it's an industry where most of the participants are paid well, you know, with hourly wages.
Sure.
They obviously suffer. Our people suffer when their overtime is down. That's temporary. But I think importantly, what's been very important is that we in the port have not reduced any staff in this time because, again, we're a long-term industry. We're growing. Our jobs are skilled. I mean, you don't just come and run a machine at the port. It takes time to gain competence in that. So we've done everything we could to maintain business as usual, and I think the industry appreciates that. And our customers appreciate that because the last thing a customer wants to hear is, well, you're open on Saturday, now you're not open on Saturday, or you're reducing your gate hours or whatever. They want predictability.
We do have a question from our audience. This is from our publisher, Grady Johnson. The panel last week we had on architecture, engineering, and construction was bullish on attracting life sciences and pharmaceutical companies to the region. Does the port play a role in those sectors?
Not a whole lot. I mean, pharmaceuticals are very time sensitive, probably more so than shipping can really service. So a lot of that is air freighted. So not a big role in it. Maybe some of the more generic products, yes, but I wouldn't label that as one of our top commodities.
You know, you mentioned that how important high-end manufacturing has been to the port, and BMW being one of the customers. And you know, I noticed that Volvo is having, you know, all of the manufacturers have had some work stoppages because of the coronavirus. Knowing what you know about the state's approach to selling the state as an economic development entity, do you think there's going to be some lasting impacts from corona, or is this more of a blip on the radar?
Well, I think obviously the way I assess this is now down to individuals being intelligent about their behavior. I mean, there's no way to legislate good behavior. People have got to be smart. The virus is not a hoax. It's real. People have got to, you know, listen to the recommendations and be intelligent about their behavior. And I believe that we'll have a vaccine sooner rather than later. I think the brightest people in the world are working on it. So I think it's a blip in answer to your question. I do think you can question, I mean, South Carolina, and you saw in our economic impact study done by Dr. Van Nessen of South Carolina, our volume in the port doubled based on the doubling of advanced manufacturing jobs in South Carolina. There's probably no state in the country that can make that claim. Alabama has done certainly very well in manufacturing. But our thesis is really that sort of doubling is not going to materialize over the next 10 years in advanced manufacturing. I don't think anyone's going to claim that BMW is going to double their footprint in the next 10 years. So we assessed that we needed to diversify our cargo base. We needed to get into the retail distribution game, get into export transloading as a way to address that trend. So I'm very bullish about the future. If we do our job well, if we are focused on recruiting the right companies, I think we'll be successful. And as long as we continue to deliver the great product that we deliver in the port. It's hard for people to realize the type of product that shippers get in the Southeast port market is really unparalleled in this country.
You mentioned the cargo base in attempts to grow it. How do you do that? How do you grow the cargo base? How do you bring in more?
Well, it's hard work. Number one, it's, you know, sales is one of those functions that often gets criticized, but it's really, really hard work, anyone that's ever done it. In our industry, it's particularly hard because these are not overnight decisions.
Right.
If I'm in container shipping in my previous career, I can do a service contract and get business next week. If you're convincing someone to put a transload facility here or a distribution center here, you're doing that over years. Some of the projects that you see happening today, we've been working on for 5-8 years. So you have to be focused. You can't be everything to everybody. You have to know, I think you have to know how your capability aligns with the needs of the customers. And I think we've been really good in recent years in sort of discerning how we're not can't be everything to everyone. We have strengths, we have weaknesses, and making sure that we maximize our strengths and kind of minimize our weaknesses in the way we sell our services.
All right. So what kind of, you mentioned that the federal government had really come through with some money for the dredging projects and some of the larger capital expenditures. What support or legislation do U.S. ports need around the country from the federal government in the next decade? Looking 10 years out, what do we?
Well, I think, as I said, our delegation, our congressional delegation, irrespective of party, irrespective of political philosophy, we're all united behind the port. Our state legislature made a fundamental statement in 2012 by putting the $300 million aside, ahead of the realization of the project. That was a real signature event, which showed the Army Corps of Engineers we were serious about realizing the project. What I think U.S. port infrastructure is expensive and it takes time. And what we need is targeted infrastructure programs which leverage the investment of the local sponsors. So we would never look for someone to pay for all of a project. But what we're saying is if we're willing to pay for 80% of it, we could use a grant for 20% of it. And what we find in the federal government, unfortunately, sometimes is they make these programs and then they put so many restrictions on them that it makes it very, very hard to use them. So it's kind of like hide the ball,
right,
in a way. So I think a little more practical approach and a focus on the people that can really use it. I mean, the reality of life is the top 10 ports in this country do 82% of the volume in U.S. ports, and that's not getting smaller. Like every other business, the top 10 ports are going to get bigger. So it's hard to focus in the political arena, but a focused sort of infrastructure grant program that leverages the capability of local sponsors would be helpful.
Talk a little bit about competition between ports, because I remember before you got here, we sometimes referred to Savannah as our mortal enemy, and sometimes Norfolk as well. But that messaging seems to have changed. Or has the environment changed? Or
well, look, I grew up in Savannah. I grew up on the port of Savannah. I have learned a lot there. Some of the fondest memories of my life there. They're a great port, and we're a great port. And we both coexist in the best market to be in the port industry. So in a way, I use the analogy kind of like the do-it-yourself industry, Home Depot and Lowe's. They compete, but they also lift the big box brand, right? So I think Savannah and Charleston really lift the public operating port concept to a new level. And I think we have to work together in the future, because when we all run out of capacity in our respective ports today, we're going to build a Jasper Ocean terminal together,
right,
where it's going to take cooperation and not competition. So that's got to be a transition in that. I think that we think there's enough business for both of us. We think we both do some things really well, and that's the way we have to look at it. So yeah, I guess you could say we're not in this blood war against each other. And I think we have a lot of respect for what they do, and I think the same applies to Norfolk, basically. There's enough freight for all of us if we do our jobs well.
One of our viewers actually asked a question similar to that. Daniel asked, who do you see as your biggest competitor port, and what is their competitive advantage? And maybe focus on the competitive advantage.
I mean, obviously our biggest competitor is Savannah, and their competitive advantage, I think, is that they have really focused on retail distribution, and
Gotcha.
some of the cargo-based areas, to grow their port. And they've also done a good job in rail. One of the key things that we have to do in Southeast ports is to leverage short-haul rail and intermodal rail, because we cannot continue to rely on trucks to move every container everywhere. And the numbers on that are pretty good. We do about 25% of our volume by rail, which is exceptional today. And a lot of that has to do with our inland port network. I mean, we do about 350,000 containers by rail, about 200,000 to and from our inland ports. But we have to continue on that path. We want to build an intermodal container transfer facility here. So I think the thing in it, now that we are realizing our port infrastructure in a timely basis, we've got to turn our attention to rail infrastructure and broadening our cargo base into retail distribution. So again, they've done a great job. Something they should be very proud of, but equally, I think we've done a great job.
A project like expanding rail involves so many players and so much. What would be a time frame for something like that to occur?
So there is on the table the building and operation of an intermodal container transfer facility near the Leatherman terminal. That can be realized once it's funded in 2 or 3 years' time. So we need it soon. I mean, it's time to realize that project. That's a project that we have talked about here in South Carolina since before I came here.
Right.
And so that is too long, to talk about a project. So we need to get that done. I think we've got a good plan to get it done. It's going to take some funding. It's no infrastructure we build is cheap.
Right.
That's the signature of the port business. I mean, nothing here is cheap. But we've got to get that done. We will get it done. We have the support of the Class 1 railroads to get it done. Palmetto Railways has been a good partner in advancing the ball this far, on the project.
You mentioned the importance of the inland port, and I know that they have rail access. Can you give us an update in terms of Dillon and maybe Greer as well? So
Greer, again, when we built it we announced it in 2012 and we opened it, I'll never forget, in November 2013 after 100 days of rain when the whole upstate flooded and whatever. And I thought we could do 100,000 rail lifts in 5 years. We're here, we're doing 150,000 a day. We've announced a couple of new projects up there. First Solar is importing about 7,000 containers. I think that location can easily get over 200,000 rail lifts. Dillon is an upstart. It's done about 30,000 lifts. We had a record month in May. And the way these inland ports work, Andy, is you have to have an anchor client. So in Greer, it was BMW. In Dillon, it's Harbor Freight Tools. A lot of people don't realize Harbor Freight Tools has 3 million square feet of distribution there. So we're leveraging their presence there right on the North Carolina border. So I think that facility will grow. It will never be as big as Greer, I don't think.
Gotcha.
But it gives us a lot of tools in our toolbox, basically.
When you, from a global perspective, what is the next generation of opportunities in logistics and distribution? And that's kind of a large question, but if you had to point to one or two things, what's the next big thing in your industry, in your sector?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it's not, I'm from container shipping. I was never a port person to begin with. It's my first port job. Most of the innovation in container shipping has been done in a sense that they're not going to build bigger ships anymore. Fortunately, they've reached the outsized limit of big ships. That trend is kind of over. I think we see more and more cargo coming to East Coast ports because 70% of the population is east of the Mississippi River, and we do manufacturing and distribution here really well, so we think we will grow above the market. And I think the ability to move containers to the interior of the country, get them off a chassis, onto the ground, and make them sort of last mile delivery available to retailers is the next wave of things. We got a big problem in our industry today about chassis, and who provides them and what do they cost and the inefficiencies of them that we've got to address. But I think it's interior infrastructure to ground containers. If you think about a container, what is really a container? A container is a mobile warehouse. You would even buy the services of a container personally, like a pod or whatever. So I think there's more to do in terms of making that concept viable and visible to people and just making our industry more reliable. The big shippers, what do they want from us? They want reliability. Supply chain management is about risk management. It's about not having flat tires, no pun intended, in distribution. So whatever we can do to improve reliability, predictability, manage cost, those are the innovations. There's no sort of thing like we're going to have wind-powered ships or stuff like that. That's not going to happen.
Our audience is mainly small and medium-sized businesses, and the port is an ever-present entity in our community. But if there was something that you wish that the business community knew about the port that they may not know, what might that be?
I think the talent and the capability of the people in the industry and the importance of the direct employment in the industry and in the low country here to the low country economy. And the fact that there are more good jobs to be created. We're going to create more jobs here. Those are good paying jobs. They don't require a college education per se. So you can have a good job for your family, send your kids to school, retire, buy a home, buy a car, whatever. This industry is critical economically to the low country. And I think the other thing is and I think the pandemic has done something really interesting. It's sort of made people appreciate the supply chain. People kind of took the supply chain for granted, right? And they hated to have a truck next to them on the highway. Well, all of a sudden, people, I think, are realizing that
Trucks carry toilet paper.
trucks carry toilet paper to stores, right? So I think there's been some increasing respect for the capability of the industry, which I think is good overall.
Yeah, definitely. Manoli is watching and ask us, do you have an update on the progress on the Leatherman terminal?
Absolutely, and he's one of our great interns that we have
Okay,
this
all right,
summer,
great.
so I'm really excited. Anytime we have young people that are interested in our industry, I'm very, very excited about that, and he certainly, boosts my excitement. So Leatherman Terminal is made good progress. We've got cranes coming in the second half of this year that'll be commissioned, and it's going to open at the end of March next year. And it will add in 3 phases between 2021 and 2030, whenever our business plan says that we need it, another 2.4 million TEUs of capacity. So we will have the same capacity as the Wando terminal. And as I said, it's the first new greenfield container terminal commissioned in the United States since 2009. So it's an exciting development.
Definitely a big project. You mentioned your intern, but you also mentioned opportunities in port jobs. For someone, not just from a wage and standard of living point of view, but do we have enough educational and training capacity or programs in the state to feed those port jobs?
Well, you probably always answer the question, you never have enough. But I would say that the state has done a really good job in technical education. Closer to home, Mary Thornley's organization, Trident Tech, has done a great job. They support us on recruiting heavy lift maintenance. Actually, one of the hardest jobs in the port to recruit are people that do heavy lift maintenance, industrial electricians, industrial mechanics. It's all specialized work. But certainly to the extent that the technical colleges support that concept, it's actually cool to go to a technical college in South Carolina, which is unique
It is.
in a
It's
way.
unusual. Yep.
And then we have to do a better job. Our team, our external affairs team, has done a great job of reaching out to schools and simply letting people know that there are good jobs available for someone that doesn't aspire to a 4-year college degree potentially, or even if you do. And that we're a growing industry, and there's a lot of pride in what we do, a lot of challenge in what we do. It's not easy to run a crane. I can't run a crane. I would make a disaster out of it probably.
Now, you have run a dredging mission.
I run a dredge, and I told them I would deepen to 76 feet if they turned their head, but they didn't turn their head, fortunately. But there's a lot of skill in what we do, a lot of pride in the industry. We have the nice thing about Charleston, Savannah would be the same. We've got a community. You've got 2nd and 3rd generation of people in the waterfront industry.
Yeah.
If you look at some of the longshoremen, they have 2nd and 3rd generation. They tell you great stories about that. So this is a meaningful industry in a historical context here as well. So it's an industry that people should be proud of, and hopefully will aspire to join.
If and I've been asking this question for everyone who's sat across me from this, if there was something you could do, you get a magic wish, or you get to snap your fingers, what would you do? What would be the change you would make right now?
I think I would always do things faster than we were able to do them. I'm a constructively restless person. So, and what does that mean? That means that I'm very happy about where we are, but I'm really never satisfied. I want to get to the next milestone. So I always want to do things quicker. I always want to progress tasks quicker. So that would be, I think, the magic wand would be just to move quicker. And then the other thing is just to make sure that we continue with the type of alignment that we have in the industry. We stay focused on the things that are important to us. What are those things? Making sure we deliver a great product, building infrastructure on time, expanding our cargo base, and developing rail. So I think if anything, I would move this rail infrastructure here along a bit faster. I think that would probably be the one thing.
I hear you. All right. Very good. Well, thank you, Jim. Thank you for joining us today. Appreciate you taking time out of your schedule, and I'd like to thank everybody who's been watching. We're going to have part 3 of reopening the region for business next week on June 25th. We're going to be talking about healthcare and some of the surrounding issues with that, and including the Trident United Way. And thank you very much for watching.